Hey everyone, tonight I would like to take you back to medieval times again and tell you about the Teutonic Knights. I had made a video about the Knights Templar a few weeks ago. You will find a link at the bottom. And together with the Knights Templar, the Teutonic Knights are probably the most famous of these monastic orders founded during the Crusades. But in a sense, their heritage is more relevant or more significant than the Knights Templars, because among other things, they founded the state of Prussia, which played a particularly important role in the history of Europe in the following centuries, even though it had gone out of their control, and especially in the 19th century, when Prussia achieved the unification of the modern state of Germany. But before we go into some of the aspects of this fantastic story, I would like you to adopt a comfortable position and try to relax. I'm going to show you a few maps as usual, but you'll be fine if you just close your eyes and let me guide you through this travel to the past. Our story begins by the end of the 12th century, in front of the walls of the city of Acre in the Middle East. In the video about the Knights Templar, I told you a bit about the context of the First Crusades and how crusaders, warriors coming from all of Europe, Germany, France, England, Italy, and other countries, tried to secure Jerusalem in priority, but also how they conquered more land in this region of the Oriental Mediterranean Sea and founded Crusader states. And Acre was one of the most important cities of the region in this time. It still exists. It is now in the north of Israel, and for centuries, if not millennia, Acre had been an important city in this part of the world, especially for trade and with a strategic position that made it an important fortress or city to control. During the Third Crusade, at the end of the 12th century, Acre was besieged by crusaders who wanted to retake it from the Muslims, and the order of the Teutonic Knights was founded during this siege, initially as a hospital created and maintained by pilgrims coming from the north of Germany, especially cities like Lübeck or Bremen. So this group, which was initially just a religious, charitable community, grew during siege and continued its activity after the Third Crusade had reconquered Saint John of Acre, and just a few years later this community transformed into a military order. This may sound surprising, but it was quite common during the Crusades, given that this part of the world was extremely dangerous to see charities or monastic orders turn into small armies to be able to perform their tasks or just defend themselves. And very much like the Knights Templar, the Teutonic Knights benefited from donations. They lived from donations, essentially, coming, in their case, from German princes, and this is what provided the basis for their prosperity. Just a decade after their foundation, the Teutonic Knights had already started to buy properties and to open branches all over Europe and parts of the Middle East and the Mediterranean Sea too, but especially close to where their donators were and where most of the members of this order came from, and that was Germany and Central Europe. The order was initially focused on helping and defending the pilgrims in the Middle East, but soon, in the years 1220, they established a military presence in the east of Europe, because in the 13th century the west and north of Europe had been Christianized. The pagans had to abandon their faith and their beliefs, but the east of Europe, everything that was east of Poland, was still pagan, and the kingdoms or principalities at the border were fighting against pagan states on the southern coast of the Baltic Sea or in Eastern Europe. And as a now powerful and respected military order, the Teutonic Knights were invited by a Polish duke, Conrad I of Mazovia, to install themselves at the Polish border and help him fight against the pagans that lived in the region of Prussia. Prussia was a region in the northeast of what is Poland today and the south of the Baltic states, and the Prussians were pagans populating this region that until now had resisted the attempts of their Christian neighbors to conquer and convert them to Christianism. The Teutonic Knights were not only supported by the Poles initially, they also received rights and privileges from the Holy Roman Empire and from the papacy as a body, as an organization that could help extend Christianism over the pagans and maybe even push east to the early Russian states. I talked about all that in the video about the Vikings with the foundation a couple of centuries before of these early Russian states by Vikings coming from Sweden especially. And these states were Orthodox Christians. They did not recognize the authority of the Pope. So if you managed to convert the pagans in the east of Europe, you could even reach these Russians and maybe also make them abandon their Orthodox faith. So the Teutonic Knights received the right to occupy and possess all the land they would be able to conquer on the pagans, and this is how the basis for the creation of their own states were set. Just in a few years, in the years 1220s, 30s and 40s, the Teutonic Knights extended their territory to not only Prussia but also the southern coast of the Baltic Sea east of Prussia, and in their attempt to colonize, to Christianize this region, their main opponent was the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Lithuania is a relatively small country today. It has become independent again in the 1990s when the USSR has disappeared, but historically, from the 12th to the 16th century, Lithuania was a particularly large and mighty state, almost an empire in the east of Europe. It had been founded as a Grand Duchy, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, by pagans coming from the historic region of Lithuania, and they had extended their territory, essentially benefiting from the void left by the collapse of the Mongol Empire. I think I will make a video about that in the near future. And this Grand Duchy of Lithuania in the 13th and part of the 14th century was a pagan state. It had not converted to Christianism yet, and it would be the strongest opponent to the Teutonic Knights' presence north of their own territory. The war, or more generally, the relations between the Knights and the Lithuanians would be particularly violent, brutal, even for the standards of the time, because the pagans were considered inferior to the Christians, and it was tolerated to make them slaves, to force them to work, or just to slaughter them. And this a very violent war and inconclusive war in reality, left a strong memory in the population of the region, even when they converted later on to Christianism. But by the end of the 13th century, the presence of the Knights was now firmly established in the region. Their monastic state extended from Prussia in the west to the Gulf of Finland in the northeast, and they developed and founded new cities in their territory, cities such as Königsberg, also known as Kaliningrad today because this city belongs to Russia, or another very important city in the history of their state, Marienburg. In just about a century, what was initially a small hospital founded during the siege of Acre had turned into a powerful organization with this large state on the Baltic Sea. And this focus on Eastern Europe would be even reinforced because of the evolution of the situation in the Middle East. The First Crusades had permitted to establish Christian states or Christian principalities in this region, but they were progressively reconquered by the Muslims, and in 1291, about 1 century after the foundation of the order, the city of Acre was lost to the Muslims, to the Mamluks, and the order had to move its center, its main house, from Acre to Venice. It wouldn't stay long in Venice because they started to be worried at the beginning of the 14th century, when started the persecution of the Knights Templar by the King of France. So they moved again this siege from Venice to Marienburg, one of the cities they had founded in their state. And now the Teutonic Order from 1307 was officially focused on this region of the world. In the 14th century, the Teutonic Knights reached the peak of their power. They take territory from Poland. The relations with Poland have deteriorated as the influence and military might of the Knights was rising, and they also defeat, after an important battle in 1348, the army of Lithuania, which is completely eradicated. But unfortunately for the Knights, a large epidemic begins at the same time, and they cannot really exploit this victory. But still, in the second half of the 14th century, they have become one of the leading, if not the leading, military power in this region. What what is going to really reverse the trend and ultimately destroy the monastic order is that Lithuania finally converts to Christianism and unifies with Poland. In 1386, the Grand Duke of Lithuania decides to convert to Christianism and to marry the Queen of Poland, Hedwig of Anjou, and together they establish a personal union between Poland and Lithuania, giving birth to one of the largest states in Europe in this time, and for the following 2 centuries this union of Poland and Lithuania will be a great power in the east of Europe. And in 1410 a large battle takes place between the Poles and Lithuanians and the Teutonic Knights, the Battle of Tannenberg or Grunwald. This is the same battle in which the King of Poland destroys, almost entirely disbands the Teutonic army. The Grand Master of the order is killed during the battle, and then the capital of the order, the city of Marienburg, is besieged by the Poles, and this ends with a treaty that concedes territories to Poland. The situation turned even worse at the beginning of the first half of the 15th century, in the years 1450, because a civil war begins within the monastic state, and opponents to the order call for help to Poland, and this ends with the loss of the city of Marienburg, forcing the order to relocate its capital to Königsberg, this city called Königsberg in German, and Kaliningrad in Russian, because it now belongs to Russia. And after this loss, the war with Poland resumes, leading to another treaty in 1466, and under the terms of this treaty, the order has to concede the west of its territory and becomes actually a vassal state of Poland. In the 16th century, about 1 century after the big defeat of Tannenberg, the order continues to decline and fall apart. Part of the members convert to Protestantism with the Reformation, including the Grand Master of the order in 1525, and he decides to abandon the monastic state and turn it into a secular state. It is this new secular state that is the cradle of the modern state of Prussia. It would go through the 16th and 17th century until it took off as an European power in the 18th century, and even more in the 19th, when Prussia unified Germany. But part of the order remained Catholic after the Reformation, and this organization survived over the following centuries. It had relocalized initially in the south of Germany and then in Austria, until it was officially disbanded at the beginning of the 19th century, about 6 centuries after its creation by Napoleon. This took place in 1809. When this happened, the order had already abandoned its military ambitions for several centuries and refocused on its initial charitable vocation. But even after the official dissolution of the Teutonic Knights, another organization with the same name and assuming the heritage reappeared in the 1830s, essentially in Austria. The order had been just a shadow of what it once was for centuries, but it went on like this and changed status in the 20th century to become a religious institute, and it is under this form with about 1,000 members, essentially coming from Germany and Austria, that the Teutonic Order still exists today, working essentially as a Catholic charitable organization recognized and encouraged by the papacy. The image of the Teutonic Knights remains very present in memories and history in the east of Europe and in German-speaking countries, to the point that in the 1930s Hitler and the Nazis tried to exploit the historical image and aura of the Teutonic Knights to reinforce the sentiment of national identity and try to give a historical meaning to the attempt to conquer land on the Slavs and east of Germany. That was just propaganda, and what remained of the order did not participate in this propaganda operation, but the whole thing was rather ambiguous, because the Nazis in reality had a fairly hostile policy towards Catholicism in Germany, and actually they treated badly what remained of the Teutonic Knights in the 1930s and 40s until their fall. This is it for today. As always, I hope you enjoyed this presentation, maybe learned a few things, that it relaxed you, and as usual, I wait for your comments and suggestions below.